Hey guys, today I'll show you a horror thriller TV series named American Horror Story Season 1 Murder House. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The story takes place in America in 1978. Little Adelaide, a girl with Down syndrome dressed in a yellow skirt, pauses to look at an abandoned, spooky house. At this moment, two reckless twin brothers armed with baseball bats decide to venture inside. Adelaide warns them that they'll die in there, but they dismiss her warning and barge in anyway. Once inside, they start to wreak havoc with their bats, smashing things around until they uncover an entrance to the basement. On the shelves of this basement are various specimens preserved in formalin, ranging from animals to human organs, even including the heads and limbs of infants. The boys want to leave upon this grim discovery, but suddenly the boy in green notices his twin brother has disappeared. Fast forward to the present. Vivian, a wife at home, discovers her husband's infidelity with one of his own students, who has also cut him with a knife in a breakup struggle. Some time has passed since the incident, and the husband, Ben, decides to take his wife Vivian and their daughter Violet to their new home by car, the haunted house as shown from the beginning of the film. Seeing their hesitation, the real estate agent tells them that the house is so cheap because a gay couple died there before. Although the couple was initially pleased with the house, they become hesitant upon learning its macabre history. However, Violet is very interested and decides they should live there. So the next day, the family of three moves in. That night, the husband tries to make amends with his wife, seeking intimacy, but Vivian remains distant, still traumatized by his affair. Their relationship is now quite strained. The next day, while Vivian is fixing some peeling wallpaper, she uncovers a strange painting. Suddenly, the grown-up Adelaide bursts in, repeating the words she said to the twin brothers that they would die here. Shortly after, Adelaide's mother arrives. They have been living next to the haunted house for 30 years. She explains that her daughter has some mental issues, and after taking Adelaide home, she starts chatting with Vivian. Before she leaves, she gives Vivian sage to burn, claiming it will ward off evil spirits. That evening, as Vivian burns the sage and walks around the room, she and her husband discover a rubber suit in the attic. Assuming it's a kinky relic left by the previous owner, they immediately throw it in the trash. Ben is a psychiatrist, and that day a patient named Tate comes to the haunted house for treatment. Tate has some radical and misanthropic thoughts, believing the world to be filthy and terrifying, even fantasizing about being a demon and killing people at school to help them die and reach a clean world. After talking with Ben, Tate encounters Violet cutting her hand and even kindly advises her on the correct way to do it. Moving into this house has affected the family in various ways. Ben starts sleepwalking, and his daughter's personality becomes very peculiar. On this day, Vivian was airing out blankets in the yard when a red-haired woman appeared. She claimed to be a housekeeper who had served the house for decades. After some conversation, Vivian found the woman to be trustworthy and decided to continue employing her to work in their home. But then, strange things happened. After Ben came downstairs, he saw a young and beautiful woman in the role of the housekeeper. However, in Vivian's eyes, she was shockingly a reliable middle-aged woman. That day, the patient Tate came to see Ben for treatment. Afterward, Tate and Violet struck up a conversation. They seemed to get along famously, hitting it off as if they'd known each other for years. Violet shared with him the reasons her family had moved there, her father's infidelity and her mother's miscarriage. They wanted a fresh start in a new environment. Just then, Ben appeared and told Tate to leave, also warning his daughter to stay away from him. On this day, Ben saw the housekeeper trying to seduce him using her young and pretty body, but Ben's rationality was not clouded by her charms, and he took care of his hormone urges by himself. Downstairs, a voice ominously declared that great misfortune was upon the house. Ben pulled back the curtains and saw a man with burn scars standing where the sheets were being aired. When he went downstairs to check, the man had disappeared. Vivian came home from shopping to find all the cabinets open. At that moment, the strange girl Adelaide pointed in Vivian's direction with a silly smile. Behind Vivian stood two ghostly figures with bloodied faces. Vivian became angry and summoned Adelaide and her mother, warning Adelaide never to enter her house again and to refrain from speaking of impending death. In a change of scene, the housekeeper tried to seduce Ben again. Although he refused her advances, Violet witnessed this and surely now saw her father as a lecherous scoundrel. One day, as Ben was helping his wife remove wallpaper, he found the painting underneath to be disturbing, suggesting the artist had psychological issues. However, Vivian was quite taken with it. Ben took this opportunity to try to flirt with his wife, but she rejected him. Ben became angry, and the two had a heated argument about his previous infidelity. He begged for a second chance, causing his wife to waver. Then the couple passionately reconciled and wrestled both their tongues and muscles, ending a year-long spell without intimacy. When their daughter came home from school one day, Vivian noticed injuries on her face and suggested changing schools, but Violet refused. Tate came over later and she told him about being bullied by a female thug at school. Tate suggested that Violet lure the bully to the basement, where he would help scare her as a lesson. In another scene, while Vivian was applying some god lotion, a man suddenly appeared at the door to flex his rubber suit. Thinking it was her husband playing romance, she even invited him to spend the night together. However, at that moment, her husband was sleepwalking. He turned on the gas stove and reached out to touch it. The lady living next door, named Constance, appeared at the scene, touching Ben's face with deep significance, telling him it's not his turn yet, and urged him to enjoy the house and go back to bed. According to the plan, Violet lured the bully to the basement, where she managed the lighting effects while Tate laughed menacingly. The bully ran out with a new scar on her face, screaming in a chicken voice. Violet was also frightened and angry, feeling that Tate went too far. She pushed him away, saying she never wanted to see him again, and then she ran out. One morning, while Ben was out for a run, he noticed a car following him. He took a detour and confronted the scarred man who had been trailing him. The man hurriedly told him that his family was in danger. They sat down to talk, and the man warned Ben to move out of the house immediately. He then confessed that he had brain cancer, had been in jail for murder, and had lived in that house for 6 months. He suffered from severe auditory hallucinations and had killed his wife and 2 daughters by setting them on fire. He asked Ben if he had been sleepwalking recently, which made Ben uneasy. However, he thought this man was mentally ill and warned him to stay away from his family before running off. The mysterious man stayed behind with a cryptic smile. That day, the nosy Constance was up to her old tricks, trying to swipe Vivian's earrings right from under her nose. Thankfully, the housekeeper caught her red-handed and put a stop to it. After a little chat, it became clear that the 2 women knew each other from way back. As Constance left, the housekeeper ominously warned, "Don't make me kill you again." Come evening, Vivian mentioned she fancied Indian food for dinner. Ben soon realized that she only craved Indian cuisine when she was pregnant. Both were overjoyed and embraced lovingly. Rewind to 1968, 3 girls were leisurely descending the staircase, all dolled up and ready for a night out at a show. They asked a timid girl if she wanted to join, but with an anatomy exam the next day, she had to pass. After they left, a man covered in blood banged on the door, pleading for the timid girl's assistance. Upon examination, the timid girl found he had no wounds at all. Suddenly, he lashed out, knocking the timid girl out cold with a bowl, and the plump nurse collapsed too. Later, the timid girl woke up in her bed, clothes intact, but the man demanded she change into a nurse's plump outfit. Tearfully, she complied. Her hands and feet were then tied. Despairing, she recited prayers along with a TV drama, but the man showed no mercy, stabbing her to death. Back to the present, Dr. Ben continued his psychotherapy sessions with Tate, who had become quite rebellious, even taunting Ben with fantasies about his daughter and dredging up his past infidelity. Containing his anger, Ben cut the session short. After Tate left, Ben received a call from a woman claiming to be pregnant. That night, Violet was chatting peacefully on the steps with the bully. Since the fright in the basement, the bully had been deeply traumatized, living in fear and convinced that demons lurked in the basement. Deep into the night, while Violet slept, Tate creeped up to her bedside. The parents were jolted awake by the sound of an alarm, quickly getting up to see what was amiss. Vivian called the police and Ben checked the house, only to find the intruder was the strange girl Adelaide, innocently laughing and playing ball with the air in the basement. When Ben left, a ball seemed to be thrown back from where he couldn't see. Back in their room, Vivian voiced her concerns about not experiencing any pregnancy symptoms and worried about the baby's health. Ben thought it was just an after effect of her previous miscarriage, seeing nothing amiss. Afterward, Ben treated a new blonde patient at home. She shared that she repeatedly had the same nightmare where she was trapped in a malfunctioning elevator and got cut in half while trying to escape. After discussing her condition, the patient expressed interest in Ben's infamous haunted house, which had become a local attraction. She was surprised that anyone had actually moved into it. Ben went for his usual morning run, haunted by recurring visions of his affair. Perhaps feeling guilty, he leaned against the tunnel wall to steady himself. There, he encountered the scarred man who guessed that Ben's life was a mess because of the haunting house. Ben broke down, crying like a giant baby, feeling it was all his fault for having the affair and getting his mistress pregnant. So he decided to return to Boston, following the man's advice to lie to his wife, saying that he needed a follow-up appointment. He'd previously treated a girl who had attempted suicide and said he'd be back in a few days. His wife was unsuspecting. That day, the nosy Constance brought over a cake laced with her own special ingredient as compensation for Adelaide disturbing their sleep. Vivian refused the gift, but Constance insisted it was for her daughter Violet. Moreover, Constance, through her sense of smell, sensed that Vivian was pregnant. Vivian was surprised and asked Constance if she could smell any problems with the baby. Constance couldn't help, as it was a sore subject for her because fate had given her 4 children with congenital disabilities. She finally had 1 healthy child, but lost the child due to certain reasons. Before leaving, Constance exchanged some meaningful words with the housekeeper. On the day her husband left, Vivian took the cake to her daughter's room. Violet realized her mother was pregnant, but was not happy, worried about the risks of advanced maternal age. They parted on bad terms, and Violet left the cake by the door. At that time, Ben was at his mistress's house, where she played the pity card to keep him there, tearfully preventing him from calling his wife. He decided to appease her for the moment. Meanwhile, at the house, the doorbell rang. Vivian peered through the peephole and saw a girl with a head injury seeking help. This scene was eerily similar to the one from 1968 as shown earlier, but she was much wiser than the girl back then and chose not to open the door, opting to call the police instead. However, she discovered her phone was missing. She told her daughter to go upstairs to find the phone and call for help. Suddenly, both mother and daughter were kidnapped by a masked intruder who had entered their home. When the masks came off, one of them was the blonde patient from that morning. They wanted to replicate the murder method from the beginning, where the man killed the timid girl. They tried to force Violet and her mother into uniforms. Violet managed to struggle and escape, running into Tate, who advised her to lure them into the basement. Meanwhile, Vivian saw Adelaide standing behind the male intruder and stalled for time by claiming someone was coming to save her. When the intruder looked back, Adelaide was gone. During a change of clothes in Violet's bathroom, the blonde intruder ate the laxative-laced cake and had to use the toilet. Violet tactfully dealt with the other intruder, leading them step by step into the basement. Next door, the nosy Constance was flirting with an attractive man when Adelaide knocked on the door, telling her mother about a bad person nearby. The mother, frustrated that her daughter ruined her smelly moment, sent Adelaide away angrily. When Adelaide knocked again, her mother became even more irritated and locked her in a room full of mirrors, where she screamed like a chicken in terror. In the haunted house, the blonde intruder was struck by Tate with an axe at her waist. During a brief moment when Vivian was changing her clothes, she knocked out the intruder with a bowl. Violet lured the other intruder into the basement, where Tate had prepared a bathtub full of water. Upon approaching, the female intruder discovered the drowned, plump nurse in the tub. Meanwhile, the male intruder also found his way to the basement, where he encountered the spirits of the deceased timid girl and the nurse. Elsewhere, Ben had just taken his mistress to get rid of the child when he noticed 23 missed calls from his wife, which made him feel uneasy. He rushed back home. In the basement, Tate, Constance, and the housekeeper had all gathered. They looked down at the 2 bodies on the floor, and Constance asked if Tate had done it. Tate denied it naturally. The next day, the police came to take statements. They reported that the blonde intruder had been found 6 blocks away, nearly severed at the waist, a fate eerily similar to her recurring nightmare. The ending was the same. After this incident, Vivian was determined to sell the house. The story flashes back to 1983. The young housekeeper, familiar with this haunted house, was cleaning when the house owner pushed open the door, attempting to force himself on her. As the housekeeper struggled and cried out, the young Constance, who was also the house owner's wife, came with a gun in hand. Upon seeing the scene, she was filled with rage. After entering, she first shot the housekeeper dead and then killed her husband, whom she had loved since she was 16 years old. Back in the present, Vivian was desperate to move out, willing even to rent an apartment as an interim solution. However, Ben revealed that they were on the brink of bankruptcy, with all their money tied up in the house. They had no choice but to sell it quickly to gain some financial relief. Facing his wife's anxiety, Ben merely thought it was a psychological issue. Vivian warned him not to lie to her, or their relationship would end. She called a real estate agent, hoping to quickly offload the house. If the agent refused, she threatened to sue for gross negligence. After all, it was the agent's fault, and the agent reluctantly agreed. Meanwhile, Constance was stealing cutlery from the house and trying to pin the theft on the housekeeper. Helpless, the housekeeper argued with her, crying out that she didn't want to stay in such a place. Constance shouted back that she also didn't want to stay in a house filled with resentment. They argued and parted unhappily. Elsewhere, Dr. Ben was treating a new patient at home. She confided that she had divorced her husband but didn't want to lose him. To keep him, she even memorized the roster of his favorite football team. As the patient rambled on, Ben's expression became increasingly vacant. After a moment of dizziness, he found his hands covered in blood, standing in the yard. He went into the house to discover that his recorder was missing, as was the patient. Searching frantically, the housekeeper also acted improperly, continuously flirting with Ben. Ben was unable to withstand it any longer and scolded her loudly. His wife, having witnessed the scene, was told that the housekeeper had been provocatively flirting with him. Vivian, puzzled by the spectacle, had no choice but to ask her to leave. The housekeeper was angry at being asked to leave, feeling disrespected, and insisted that it was Ben who had made advances on her. Regardless, she refused to leave. After this incident, Vivian was even more certain that they needed to move out quickly. Ironically, the next morning, as Vivian was pruning roses, a sightseeing bus full of people came to visit their famously haunted house. On this day, the housekeeper informed Ben that a patient was awaiting him. Upon entering, Ben was shocked to find his mistress there. She told him that she hadn't ended the pregnancy and had decided to stay, even considering moving near their home, expecting him to foot all the bills. Ben instantly felt overwhelmed. Just then, a police officer arrived to seek his cooperation with an investigation regarding a missing patient he had previously treated. After all, he was the last person seen with her. However, no clues were found at Ben's, and the officer departed. The scene shifts to Vivian on a tour bus visiting her own house, which has become the town's most renowned tourist spot. The guide shares the haunted house's history, built in 1922 by a surgeon named Charles for his high society wife. Their life there was unhappy. She despised her husband's lack of success, and with finances dwindling, she introduced 24 pregnant girls to him for surgeries, all of whom died at the hands of Dr. Charles. Hearing this, Vivian shivers and notices blood on her trousers, panicking and running home. Afterwards, Vivian and Ben went for a hospital checkup. The doctor assured them there was nothing seriously wrong and the baby was healthy. The doctor could see Ben's recent anxiety, and Vivian expressed her worries about the house. The doctor advised against moving due to the stress it could cause, potentially leading to a miscarriage. Meanwhile, Constance approached the haunted house and saw Tate at the window. She waved, but the confused real estate agent beside her watched. Turning to her, she wished her luck in selling the house soon. Ben, sticking to his routine, went for a morning run and encountered the scarred man who asked to borrow $1,000. Strapped for cash himself, Ben flatly refused. Returning home, he searched for something. While looking under the sofa, he suddenly felt dizzy and blacked out, waking up on the backyard lawn. This was the second time he awoke in the same spot. Constance thought it was due to his stress and cautioned him that the previous homeowner had used pesticides on the land. At that moment, the doorbell rings, and a gorgeous woman appears at the door, saying she's come to see the house. Vivian, gripping a sharp object, lets her in. This woman is the very image of Dr. Charles's wife. As soon as she enters, she can't stop praising the decor and the furniture. However, her admiration abruptly ends when she sees the kitchen. The smile on her face fades. She does not like this remodeled kitchen with its excessive modernity. She asks Vivian for a glass of water, but as the camera pans, we see a large gash in the woman's head. When Vivian turns back with the tea, the gorgeous woman has vanished. Meanwhile, Ben is outside in the yard, inexplicably digging a hole. A police officer finds him and informs him that the missing patient has been found. She had attempted suicide. In her pocket was the recorder Ben had been searching for. When the officer plays the recorder, it reveals the events as they happened. The patient saw that Ben, as a doctor, was indifferent to her plight, leading her to cut her hand. Ben had reacted and stopped her, and then the patient disappeared with the recorder for several days. The recording only showed Ben's negligence as a doctor, not that he was the cause of her suicide. The officer leaves after the investigation. On the other hand, Vivian is determined to move out but faces strong opposition from her daughter, who threatens to run away from home if her mother persists with this decision. The scene shifts to Ben, receiving a call from the hospital. The doctor has found traces of an anesthetic in Ben's blood test, a drug known to severely impair memory, which is why it's been banned. At this moment, the mistress comes to the house, yelling for Vivian. Ben calms his mistress using his words first and tongue later. He escorts her to the door where the scarred man suddenly appears wielding a shovel, delivering several blows and sending her straight to meet Satan. Ben is stunned by the sight. The man notices the hole Ben had been digging, so he continues to dig deeper, mentioning to borrow money from Ben again. As he digs, he uncovers a body. The housekeeper upstairs watches this scene, deeply saddened. The man drags the mistress's body into the hole and buries it. Then Ben covers it with a layer of cement and erects a gazebo over the spot. Constance upstairs says to the housekeeper with a meaningful look, "You're trapped now." It appears the buried body belongs to the housekeeper, suggesting that the ghost we've seen earlier is hers. In the dead of night, the ghost of Charles's wife sits beside Vivian's bed, looking intently at her. The story flashes back to 2012 when the room was occupied by a gay couple. The submissive partner wanted to carve pumpkins together, but the dominant one was solely focused on going to the gym, eager to see another pretty-faced trainer. This enraged the submissive partner, who had been trying to make the house cozy and beautiful to ensure a successful future sale. But to his dismay, his partner was out flirting with other pretty faces. Their argument escalated and the dominant partner left, while the submissive one was troubled by the situation. Suddenly, a man appeared to flex his rubber suit, and the submissive partner mistook him for his own partner, finding him terrifying yet sexy. Without a word, the rubber-clad man pushed his head into the sink and twisted his chick neck, breaking it. The dominant partner returned suddenly and had a brief encounter with the man in rubber. Fast-forwarding to the present, the couple and the real estate agent are discussing at the dining table. Vivian complains that in 2 weeks, only one person came to see the house, and even that person was scared away. The agent thinks it's an issue with the house's image and suggests offering some money to hire a decorator, especially with Halloween coming up. Decorated with pumpkins, the house is sure to be a hit. The agent also heard about the couple's house being egged. Interestingly, the egg-throwing pranksters seem familiar. They are the same twin brothers who died in this haunted house from the beginning. Vivian agrees with the agent and asks if there are experts in this field. Meanwhile, Constance's new boyfriend is telling Adelaide a Halloween story. Constance is annoyed by this and sends him out to run errands, effectively getting rid of him. She also warns her daughter that she can never touch her man. On Halloween, the scarred man comes calling again. He still wants Ben to give him $1,000 and keeps reminding him how cool the gazebo in the backyard is. Infuriated, Ben orders him to get lost with his scarred face. Back in his room, Ben continues his conversation with Tate. He feels helpless about Tate's condition and has recommended other psychologists, but Tate insists on being treated only by him. Ben then expresses his doubt. Why was Tate at the scene on the night his wife and daughter were attacked? Tate explains he was just wandering around, throwing pebbles at Violet's window with no response, so he came out. Ben cannot tolerate strangers entering his home at will and is determined to stop treating Tate. At this point, Tate breaks down in tears, saying only Ben can treat him. Faced with this tearful plea, Ben feels utterly helpless and agrees to continue Tate's therapy. Meanwhile, Vivian had some help from the police. They installed a security system at her place and told her that if she ran into any danger at night, she could activate the device at any time, and the police would be dispatched immediately. She went to the room where the housekeeper was, who was carving a pumpkin. Seizing the moment, the housekeeper asked for leave, hoping to go home to see her mother on Halloween. Vivian agreed to her request. She also took the housekeeper's carved pumpkins and set them outside the front door, where she noticed a gay couple admiring her house. They seemed to be the same couple as shown earlier. She asked if they were decorators hired by the real estate agent. After introducing themselves, they followed her into the house and helped carve pumpkins while making small talk. Vivian asked if they had any other suggestions to help sell the place. Without hesitation, they suggested tearing down the gazebo, which alarmed Ben since the gazebo's underground hid his mistress, who was pregnant with his child. Of course, he couldn't tear down the gazebo. In his agitation, he accidentally cut his hand, and the dominant partner went upstairs to help him treat the wound. After the wound was treated, the dominant partner began to get frisky, trying to make Ben feel high and good. But Ben dared not involve himself into another affair again, especially not with a man. Meanwhile, Vivian was chatting with the submissive partner. She sensed their relationship and asked if he and his partner had had a fight. With a sense of resignation, the man admitted that his partner kept cheating on him. She asked how he found out about his partner's infidelity, and he said it was through the call logs. Text messages can be deleted, but the bills can't be tampered with. Elsewhere, Adelaide suddenly appeared from under the bed, giving Violet a scare. She wished Violet could do her makeup to make her look pretty. Violet agreed, and after she did Adelaide's makeup, Adelaide happily went home. Constance was angry when she saw Adelaide's made-up face and told her to wash it off immediately. Adelaide was upset because she didn't want to be the ugly girl anymore. She didn't want to dress up as Snoopy. Then Violet, following her agreement with Tate, went to the basement at midnight. As soon as she turned her head, she found Tate wearing a rubber suit to scare her. Tate took off the hood, lit a candle, and told her all about the house, including a history lesson. Dr. Charles had become addicted to drugs back in the day, and his wife, Nora, not wanting their home to fall into poverty, had him start performing surgeries for pregnant women to make a living. A girl couldn't keep her mouth shut and told her boyfriend about it. After her boyfriend found out, he kidnapped their child. Instead of a ransom demand from the kidnapper, the police arrived with a box containing the body of their child. Charles tried to find a way to bring his child back to life through experiments. The experiments worked, but the child turned into a monster that still resides here to this day. Violet clearly didn't want to believe a word Tate said, but they left the basement together, and soon after, the candles were extinguished. On the night of Halloween, Adelaide was sulking in bed, unwilling to go out. Noticing her gloom, her mother gave her a gift, a beautiful wig mask that cheered Adelaide up immensely. Ben dressed up as a vampire, hoping to delight his wife, but suddenly she brought up the name of his mistress. In the end, she revealed to her husband that she had checked his phone bill. He kept insisting that the mistress would no longer come after him, but right then, the mistress called his cell phone. The couple moved to the living room where the submissive man was decorating the house. He not only criticized the couple's costumes, but also threw a tantrum because Ben had not bought the correct type of green apples. He threatened to make the couple leave, claiming that they were the true masters of the house. Already upset about the mistress, Vivian became furious with the gay couple's antics and demanded they leave immediately. She even wanted her husband to leave. Suddenly, she began to feel a pain in her stomach. Ben quickly took her to the hospital, leaving the submissive man alone at home. At the doorstep, Adelaide wanted to find the submissive man. She was chasing a group of girls who had just mocked her when she was struck by a speeding car, leaving this world behind. In the hospital, the doctor said that normally, a 2-month-old fetus is the size of a kidney bean. After the ultrasound, the fetus appeared to be not even 2 months in size, and then the doctor fainted. Meanwhile, Constance, seeing her daughter lying in the street, couldn't bear the grief. She refused to let the police and doctors take her to the hospital, and instead, she dragged Adelaide to the lawn of the haunted house. The housekeeper went to the nursing home, tearfully apologizing to her mother lying in the hospital bed before removing her mother's oxygen mask. Her mother's spirit appeared behind her, asking her daughter to follow her, but she could not. Back at the haunted house, the scarred man was violently pounding on the door of the haunted house, demanding $1,000 from Ben. Violet was terrified and retreated to her room. Just as a pair of hands reached out from under the bed to grab her greasy leg, Tate called Violet downstairs. Delighted that her crush had come for her, she happily went out on a date with Tate. When the parents returned home, they frantically searched for their daughter. Luckily, Violet had her cell phone with her. The mother called and reached her, with Violet explaining she had gone out with a friend. Vivian told her to come home in an hour, but then turned around to see her husband holding a knife. Ben, who had just seen the ghost of the mistress at the door, panicked and said he was going out to settle the mess. After a day of turmoil, Vivian was exhausted and planned to discuss with Ben leaving the house the next day. But when Ben stepped outside, he found the scarred man and beat him fiercely. Ben felt that all this was a ploy by the man and the mistress to extort money from him. He almost lost control and killed the man, but managed to restrain himself in the end. Before leaving, he warned the man that if he dared to step into his house again, he would kill him. Violet was by the seaside at the moment, snuggled up to Tate next to a burning bonfire. Under the romantic setting, Tate opened up to Violet, sharing his high school life, which was a bleak part of his past, something he preferred not to talk about much. Suddenly, a group of oddly dressed youths with various injuries approached them. After an unfriendly exchange, it seemed that these people had a deep connection with Tate. They claimed they had been waiting for Tate for many years, but he had been hiding in the haunted house and dared not come out. They bore some resentment towards Tate, but fortunately, they were somewhat restrained. Seeing the situation, Tate grabbed Violet, and they fled for their shitty lives. Meanwhile, Vivian was about to take a bath when she received a call from the mistress. Their conversation started off relatively calm and harmonious. However, the mistress kept provoking her, and Vivian could no longer tolerate it. The two began to quarrel fiercely, exchanging bullshit rather than hormones. Then the words "Ask him," written by the mistress, appeared on the steamy glass door. Vivian hurried downstairs to tell her husband that she had seen the mistress's shadow in the house. Ben grabbed a fruit knife and went to the basement, calling out the mistress's name. As expected, he found her sexy figure in the basement, and they began to exchange bullshit. At that moment, the scarred man appeared behind Ben and knocked him out with a shovel. He then kept apologizing to the mistress, but she was too busy to deal with him at the moment. Hearing noises outside, Vivian went to check and found the submissive man venting his anger, destroying the pumpkin lanterns at their doorstep. He felt that Vivian had ruined the Halloween he had longed for and angrily demanded that she leave his home. Frightened, Vivian quickly returned inside, only to find that the kitchen was on fire. Over at Violet's side, the group of young people with a gripe against Tate gave chase. Violet, brandishing a pair of scissors, went out to drive them away. These youths harbored intense hatred for Tate, and Violet was clueless about the root of their conflict. They urged her to look into the matter of Westfield High School, indicating there was something she needed to uncover. As they moved to harm Violet, Tate wanted to protect her, luring the spectral youths away by running off. Meanwhile, Vivian finally confronted the mistress face to face. The mistress was intent on revealing the truth, eager to show her what kind of man her husband really was. Thus, she began to recount their trip to Boston and the pregnancy. Vivian was perplexed, having thought her husband had confided their pregnancy to the mistress. Upon hearing this, the mistress's complexion changed. She realized why Ben had been unwilling to accept the child, because his wife was already pregnant. Enraged, the mistress picked up a shard of glass and advanced towards Vivian. At that moment, Ben, who had been knocked out in the basement, was rescued by the original house owner, perhaps driven by guilt and a shred of conscience. She refused to allow another tragedy in the house and whispered to him to save the child before disappearing. The mistress was in a state of total breakdown. Holding a piece of broken glass, she was intent on removing the unborn child from Vivian's womb. Fortunately, Ben arrived just in time. Facing the mistress's threats, he had no choice but to confess his lies to his wife, that his trip to Boston was to be with the mistress and that he had returned to her even after being caught cheating. Soon after, the police arrived and took the mistress away. At this time, Constance invited Violet over for tea. She seemed heartbroken over Adelaide's death. Adelaide had always wanted to be a pretty girl, even though she didn't look pretty, but as a mother, she had done her daughter's makeup one last time. She knew Violet had encouraged Adelaide, and though Violet meant well, she felt partly responsible for Adelaide's death for letting her go out alone. The lady even mentioned that Adelaide was the child who resembled her the most. Violet was shocked. She hadn't known Constance had other children, and even more surprising was that Tate was also her child, and Tate himself was unaware. Constance implored Violet not to tell Tate this, as he was a sensitive child and needed to be protected. At this point, Tate had reached his limit. He stopped running, and the group of young people confronted him, accusing him of the heinous crimes he had committed. They claimed Tate had ruined the beautiful lives they were supposed to have and demanded that he admit to his sins so they could finally be released. Tate tried hard to remember, but all he could muster were fragmented pieces. He was in pain, unable to recall anything. Dawn was breaking, and as the sun was about to rise, the young people had no choice but to leave. That morning, all the ghosts who died in the house returned to it, their souls once again imprisoned by the building. Meanwhile, the police officer escorted the mistress back to the station, only to find upon getting out of the car that she had already vanished into thin air, leaving behind nothing but a pair of handcuffs. After the chaos of the previous night within the haunted house, the couple were exhausted, both mentally and physically. They needed a period of calm. Ben packed his bags, gave Vivian a final kiss, and then left. The time then flashes back to before 1994 at the Westfield High School, where Tate went on a rampage with a gun on campus. A group of students hiding in the library were all tragically killed. These students were the same group of young people who had surrounded Tate previously. In the end, Tate was killed at home by the police in the same manner. Violet did a search online about the past of the Westfield High School, which startled her greatly. Including Tate, all the young people she had seen the night before had been murdered. This meant that the individuals she had been with the previous night were not among the living. Violet was shocked and hurried downstairs to find her mother wanting to talk about her experience. However, her mother was nowhere to be found, and she encountered Constance instead. Constance got straight to the point, confident that Violet knew about Tate's secret. She told Violet that it was the house that had turned Tate into what he had become. She suggested that Violet meet someone, a medium with psychic abilities, saying that it's her only choice to face the current situation and understand the truth. The medium educated Violet about the ghosts like those from the previous night who refused to leave the world of the living until their desire for vengeance was satisfied. There were also spirits like Tate, who did not realize they were dead, wandering the earth. That explains why Constance had sought Dr. Ben to treat Tate, hoping to resolve his inner turmoil and help him find release. This conversation had completely shattered Violet, causing her to run out, unable to accept it all at once. Elsewhere, Vivian is having a chat with a police officer who is conducting a safety check at her home. The officer shares that he has also been a victim of infidelity, revealing that his wife had an affair with another woman. Just then, Ben returns home. He's broke and can't afford to rent a place, so he has no choice but to steel himself and continue seeing patients at home. Vivian is thoroughly disappointed in him, but out of past affection, allows him to see one last patient before leaving. The patient this time is a middle-aged man who has never been scared of anything from childhood. But recently, he's been terrified by local folklore to the point where he can't sleep with the lights off or dare to look in a mirror. The reason is a story about a pig butcher who would wear a pig's head mask from his previous slaughter before entering the slaughterhouse. One time he slipped and fell, and the pigs swarmed him, eating him so thoroughly that not even his bones and smelly parts were found. Locals are petrified, and the butcher's regular customers all met gruesome ends, being eviscerated and flayed, and then hung upside down like the pigs in his shop. It's said that if one stands in front of a mirror and recites a certain incantation, the butcher will return to wreak havoc. Meanwhile, Vivian is calling the hospital and finds out that the technician who performed her ultrasound has resigned. While on the phone, Constance comes in with a plate. Learning that Vivian has been suffering from severe pregnancy symptoms, she brings over a plate of pig offal, claiming it's beneficial for the fetus. After sharing this, she leaves. The housekeeper cooks some of the offal but leaves the tenderest part of the pancreas, suggesting it's best eaten raw for its texture. Initially resistant, Vivian eventually eats it raw. On Wednesday, in an attempt to confront the patient's fears, Ben takes him to the bathroom. With Ben's encouragement, the patient musters the courage to recite the incantation, but upon pulling back the shower curtain, finds a ghostly figure standing in the center, which terrifies him into screaming like a little girl. Ben rushes in, and the patient is completely traumatized, worsening his psychological state rather than helping it. Due to financial strain, Vivian contemplates firing the housekeeper. However, the housekeeper becomes emotional and insists on staying without pay, especially given that Vivian is pregnant and needs support. Touched by this, Vivian expresses gratitude when the housekeeper brings her a fresh brain. Vivian eats it with gusto, cleaning the plate. After finishing, however, a puzzled expression crosses her face as she wonders how she managed to eat the whole thing. Violet has returned home. She ventured alone into the basement in search of Tate. This time, she encountered all the ghosts. Frightened, Violet hurriedly fled the basement and returned to her room, now completely distraught. In desperation, she took out a bottle of sleeping pills, contemplating suicide to join Tate as a couple in the afterlife. However, Tate's love for Violet was genuine. Weeping, he dragged her to the bathtub and revived her with water, bringing her back to consciousness. In the church, Vivian found the female doctor who had previously performed her ultrasound. The doctor revealed to her that during the sonogram, she noticed the child in her womb had a small hoof. That day, the patient took Ben's advice and decided to confront his fears at home. Standing in front of the mirror, he mustered the courage to recite a spell. After a few attempts with no apparent effect, he grew bolder, shouting the incantation repeatedly. Unfortunately, a criminal hiding behind the shower curtain heard him, mistook the chance for insults, and fatally shot him. Meanwhile, Constance was chatting with the medium. She asked the medium to summon Adelaide. The mother, who had always appeared indifferent to her daughter, finally expressed her love for her. The daughter had been a handful, and as a single mother, it hadn't been easy. She regretted not expressing her feelings to Adelaide, whom she was actually proud of. The medium told her that Adelaide had heard her and was grateful, thankful that her mother hadn't buried her with her brother. In the afterlife, Adelaide was now a beautiful girl. Tate felt that Violet had changed. He noticed her coldness towards him and didn't understand what he had done wrong. All he could do was express his love for her, holding her in his arms on the bed. The story shifts back to the haunted house in 1993. Constance and the scarred man were sitting by the fireplace, engaged in a somewhat intimate conversation. Driven by her words, he made his way to the attic where he found her deformed child, a pitiable sight with his leg chained. The scarred man coaxed him onto the bed and without a second word, smothered him to death. Back to the present, the couple was at the hospital for a checkup. The doctor said that the child in her womb had a small hoof, which greatly unsettled Vivian, so they came back for another checkup. The doctor told her she was carrying twins and that the babies were very healthy. The couple breathed a sigh of relief. That day, the real estate agent brought a Persian man to view the house. The agent praised the house enthusiastically, and the man was satisfied with it, especially with the young and beautiful housekeeper. He even planned to demolish the backyard gazebo to build a swimming pool. Upon hearing this, the housekeeper appeared excited because only by tearing down the gazebo could her trapped spirit be set free. Seeing the man's interest in the house, Vivian couldn't bear to deceive him and told him about the mysterious deaths of the previous homeowners. The man had some doubts about the price, so he left his business card and left. After he was gone, the agent and Vivian had a disagreement. The agent felt that with her approach, the house would definitely not sell, but Vivian believed in being honest with people. Suddenly, they were drawn away by a noise and discovered the scarred man in the living room of the house. He expressed his desire to buy the house. Seeing his appearance, the agent didn't believe he could afford it and took out a gun without a word, ordering the man to get lost with his scarred face. But the scarred man threatened her to put down the gun, or he would sue her for violating the Americans with Disabilities Act. The agent hesitated but complied. That evening, the family had a rare dinner together. Violet had been in a terrible mood for some time, distressed by her parents' impending divorce and the sale of the house she loved. Unable to bear the atmosphere, she left and returned to her room. The remaining couple felt that they had to sell the house no matter what. Vivian told her husband that now 2 buyers had seen the house, one a Persian businessman and the other the scarred man in the suit. She was prepared to disclose to the buyers the events that had happened in the house, but Ben didn't want to do so as the law only required them to disclose the events of the past 3 years, leading to an argument between them. The next day, the Persian man came to see the house again. He was greeted by a glamorous young housekeeper who led him to Violet's room and flirted with him to the point where the Persian man couldn't resist her charms. That night, Ben found the scarred man and asked him about his real intentions, since he was penniless and had even borrowed $1,000 from him. The man said the house was of great significance to him and could bring him happiness again. It turned out the scarred man was a cad. He had fallen in love with Constance and planned to drive his wife and daughter out of the house. Unable to bear such betrayal, his wife took her daughter and self-immolated at home. After hearing this, Ben didn't react much, only telling the man that they had found a real buyer, and if he continued to harass their family, he would have the police arrest him. Afterwards, the agent and Vivian took a sightseeing tour bus and listened to the guide tell the story of the haunted house. The mad doctor, Charles, in an attempt to revive his child, turned him into a monster. He told his wife that the child was in the nursery, and the wife went upstairs to see the child, only to find he had become a blood-sucking monster. Unable to accept this, she trembled. Charles also told her that to revive the child, he had taken the heart of a young girl. The wife, in remorse, shot Charles and then ended her own life. Since her own child did not have a good ending, she hoped such a tragedy would not happen again. That's why she saved Ben in the basement, urging him to protect the child in Vivian's womb. Elsewhere, Violet stumbled upon a 2-story attic by chance. When she entered one of the rooms in the attic, she found the deformed monster. Tate appeared and scared it away, telling Violet that she needed to learn to adapt to this place. Then Tate showed her the treasures he had discovered in the house, including a delicate tin box containing some silverware and photographs of the Charles family. Suddenly, the ghost of a young girl appeared, telling her to look at what she had done to her before vanishing. That day, Constance from next door went to the basement and found the scarred man. He told her that the man who came to see the house planned to level the place. Constance, naturally not wanting the place to be demolished, approached the Persian man, hoping he wouldn't knock down the house. The Persian man retorted that if she had the money, she could buy it herself. Speechless, she left, unable to hide her anger. After all, not everyone was as wealthy as he was. The Persian man told her to get lost with her old body. After she left, she told the housekeeper that the Persian businessman had no intention of building her a swimming pool. He planned to demolish the place and build affordable apartments, ensuring her remains would stay buried and forgotten underground. Believing him, the housekeeper's glimmer of hope was extinguished. Constance advised her to do what she does best. So the housekeeper lured the Persian man to the basement, where he would never have expected his greed to lead to his death. Finally, she and the man in the suit coordinated their efforts. The housekeeper in front, the scarred man behind, using a plastic bag over his head to suffocate him to death. Constance appeared and told them to drag the body out. She didn't want to encounter his ghost in the house. Later, Tate came to Ben for therapy. Through conversation, Ben realized that Tate had become much calmer. He told Tate that he knew they were close and that if Violet was in any danger, he hoped Tate would inform him immediately, as he couldn't bear to lose her. Tate said that if Ben were his father, his life would have been completely different. Constance came looking for Tate, reaching out to touch her son, but Tate avoided her. She asked Tate how his therapy was going, and he revealed that he had found the root of his problems. He hated his mother. Vivian went to Violet's room and told her that someone was interested in buying the house. She hoped that she and her daughter could move to her aunt's place. The daughter asked what about their father, to which Vivian replied that she hadn't considered him yet. Violet showed her mother the photographs she had found in the attic. The mother recognized that the lady in the photo was the same tenant who had visited their house, but the tour guide had clearly said she died from a gunshot wound. How could she have seen her again? Vivian began to harbor doubts herself. After that, Vivian held a photograph of the Charles family and stated that the visitor she had hosted a while ago was Charles's wife, Nora. She seemed to know the layout and furnishings of the room as if she had built them herself. Vivian was convinced that she had seen Nora's ghost. However, the real estate agent and the housekeeper believed that it was merely a hallucination due to her mental strain. They dismissed the possibility of ghosts. Before leaving, the agent warned Vivian to quickly resolve the transfer of ownership, or else she would face troubles far worse than any ghost story. A few years ago, the former homeowner, the submissive man who felt he was losing his mind, met with his best friend to confide that he suspected his dominant partner was unfaithful. He had found evidence of his partner's online affair with someone else, chat logs that were explicitly intimate. His friend suggested that he should do something thrilling to recapture his partner's heart. Taking this advice, he went to a shop and, on the owner's recommendation, bought a rubber suit. However, when he wore it at home that evening, hoping to impress his partner, he was met with indifference. Their argument escalated and their relationship hit rock bottom. His partner left, and the submissive man broke down in tears on the bed. Back in the present, Nora was also weeping bitterly. At that moment, the mistress also appeared to flex her ghostly figure and urged Nora to pull herself together. She revealed to Nora that everyone was trapped in this house, unable to leave for some unknown reason. Confused, Nora didn't understand. She didn't even know she was already dead. The mistress persuaded Nora to accept the truth by touching the bullet wound at the back of her head. Skeptical at first, Nora eventually had to face the harsh reality. Next, she burst into tears again over the loss of her child. The mistress said she also lost her child and complained about why Vivian got to have 2 children. It wasn't fair for them. She said Vivian was pregnant with twins and proposed they should each take Vivian's babies for themselves. That night, the 2 aggrieved ghosts stirred up trouble, pushing Vivian to the brink of a mental breakdown. The story flashes back a few years to the night when the submissive man was attacked by the man in rubber. His dominant partner showed up, intending to fight back, but the rubber-clad attacker killed him too and dumped his body in the basement. Nora, who was in the basement, sensed something was amiss. Looking up, she saw Tate appear before her, revealing that it was Tate who dressed up in the rubber suit all along. Tate told her he knew she was suffering and had come to rescue her. A new family was about to move in, one that could fulfill her desire to care for children. Nora gently touched Tate's hair, visibly moved. That day, Ben followed his daughter to the basement, where he found her seemingly talking to herself while playing with a ball. He asked who she was talking to, and she said no one. He wanted to talk to his daughter. She hadn't been to school in 2 weeks, and he wanted to know what was happening. But the daughter responded sarcastically, criticizing him for being a renowned psychologist who couldn't even notice his own wife's disoriented state. Violet's disrespectful words angered her father, and their conversation ended in discord. Vivian found out the doctor had prescribed her medication with hallucinatory side effects, which the doctor had failed to mention. She thought that this could explain all the recent supernatural occurrences and considered the possibility that she might really be having some mental issues. But the housekeeper, who still had some kindness in her heart, knew that Vivian wasn't crazy. The strange experiences Vivian was having weren't caused by the medication. So the housekeeper confessed to her that the house was not ordinary and was indeed home to some unnatural forces and malevolent spirits. She advised Vivian to leave before it was too late. Hearing this from the housekeeper, Vivian didn't hesitate to wake her sleeping daughter, planning to leave the house that very night. However, just as they were about to speed away, they discovered two ghosts in the back seat, and they returned home unsuccessful. The next morning, the couple began to argue again. Ben was unhappy about Vivian wanting to leave with their daughter and the unborn child. He still didn't think the house was the problem, but believed it was his wife's mental state that was at fault. Vivian wanted her daughter to confirm the sighting of the ghosts in the car the previous night. However, Violet, who had confirmed her relationship with the ghostly Tate and didn't want to be separated from him, followed Tate's advice and kept quiet about the truth. This left her mother completely isolated. In the basement, the mistress tried to persuade Tate to help her complete her plan. While talking, she attempted to engage in a smelly hormone yoga with Tate. But Tate, declaring his love for Violet, pushed her sexy body away. On that day, Vivian called the real estate agent to her house, complaining of dizziness and nausea, and asked her for a glass of water. While the agent was busy, Vivian stealthily took a gun from the agent's bag. That night, she became sensitive to her surroundings. She thoroughly checked her room before cautiously lying down. However, once the lights were out, she kept seeing a shadow moving around. Suddenly, a man in a rubber suit grabbed her from behind, causing her to panic and scream in a chicken voice. In her frantic state, she accidentally set off the alarm. Hearing her screams, Ben rushed to her aid but ended up accidentally shot by her. The police received the alarm and arrived with a doctor. After examination, it was determined that Ben had only suffered a superficial wound and was not seriously hurt. Meanwhile, the mistress and Tate in rubber were causing trouble around Vivian. The mistress provoked her by telling her that the child in her womb wasn't her husband's and the real father was right here. She even encouraged Tate to continue assaulting Vivian. Vivian broke down, screaming and struggling, which was witnessed by Ben and a police officer upstairs. They hurried to calm her down. Once she regained her composure, she told her husband that she had seen the man in the rubber suit and the mistress, who wanted to take her unborn child. She insisted they had just been there, but there were no signs of them. Ben became even more convinced that his wife was mentally ill, and along with their selfish daughter, decided to have her committed to a psychiatric hospital. Watching her mother being taken away, Violet felt guilty for not speaking the truth, which led to her mother's predicament. She muttered to herself that it was all her fault. It's then revealed that Tate had dragged a gay couple to the basement, where the submissive partner, still semi-conscious, wanted to hold his lover's hand in his final moments. However, Tate gave them no chance and shot them both. He then staged the scene to look like a crime of passion, where the submissive partner, out of jealousy, had killed his dominant partner and then committed suicide. The couple died together, their souls forever trapped in that house, unable to move on. The scene shifts to a beautiful actress entering the home of a dentist after being introduced by a friend. Little did she know this visit would lead to her untimely demise. After being anesthetized and losing consciousness, the dentist sexually assaulted her, and upon realizing she was not breathing, dragged her body to the basement. There, he encountered his mentor, Dr. Charles, the very first owner of the house and a dreaded surgeon responsible for the deaths of numerous pregnant women. In a gruesome act, Charles bisected her body and removed her organs. Seeing her sad expression, he cut the corners of her mouth and sewed them into a grotesque smile. The next day, a passerby with a child found the actress's mutilated body on the lawn. Her death was horrific, her mouth slashed open, her abdomen almost hollowed out. Returning to the present day, Ben wanted the housekeeper to whip up a sandwich for his daughter. With Vivian away, the housekeeper saw an opportunity to seductively test Ben's fidelity. He nearly lost control a few times, but thankfully his rationality held firm. He informed the housekeeper of his deep love for his wife, expressing his desire for his wife's return home to recuperate so that he could take care of her. Hearing this, the housekeeper sheepishly left, but not without making one final pass at Ben before she did. That evening, Constance was at home painting when her muscular lover returned. She didn't show much respect for her young paramour, sending him off to buy cigarettes. As the young lover passed by the haunted house, he caught the eye of the mistress, who attracted him for a dual purpose. It was a means of getting back at Constance, and on the other hand, preparing to become the lady of the haunted mansion herself. In essence, she wanted to see if intimacy with the living was possible. The next morning, the mistress's sister arrived with the police, suspecting Ben of foul play in the mistress's disappearance, especially since he had built a gazebo in the backyard on the day she vanished. The timing seemed too coincidental, and Ben was extremely anxious. Although he hadn't killed the mistress, her disappearance was significantly connected to him. Fortunately, in this house, spirits could reveal themselves, and the mistress appeared just in time to disrupt the disadvantageous situation for Ben, clearing his name. Once they left, the furious Ben confronted the mistress, demanding an explanation or threatening to reveal everything. Unexpectedly, she began to admit her mistakes, blaming her erratic behavior on the Halloween day on her pregnancy, which had her mind in disarray. She vowed to wait for Ben to change his heart. Ben felt a slight softening inside him. After a while, the actress dying earlier came to visit him for medical attention, claiming she was in deep trouble, entangled with many men. She sought Ben's help, having no money, and was willing to repay him with her sexy body. Although Ben maintained a straight face, his mind began to wander. However, a call from the doctor snapped him back to reality. The doctor revealed that the twins in his wife's womb had different fathers, striking Ben like a bolt from the blue. Constance stormed over to the ominous house, intent on confronting Violet. Instead, she ran into the housekeeper. Constance vented, saying her young lover had taken the dog for an unusually long walk and returned with a strange scent on him, leading her to mistakenly believe that Violet had seduced him. The housekeeper informed her that Violet's standards weren't that low and reminded her of the mess her son Tate has gotten into. He made a move on Vivian. Constance immediately went to the basement to find Tate, expressing her frustration with his actions and demanding to know if he had done it. Tate, unusually subdued, pleaded with her not to tell Violet. Meanwhile, Ben encountered the housekeeper and the actress, engaged in a suggestive scene in the office area. This time, without hesitation, he ordered the fishy two of them to get out, refusing to treat the actress any further and deciding to fire the housekeeper. Afterwards, Ben went to the hospital to check on his wife's condition. The doctor informed him that her delusions hadn't subsided, with the trauma inflicted by the man in the rubber suit leaving a deep scar on her psyche. After hearing this, he visited his wife and saw the mistreatment she was enduring, but he had no intention of bringing her back home. To him, his wife was no longer the same normal person he had once loved. Returning home, Ben entered the gazebo and found the mistress there, who thought that with his wife gone, it would finally be her turn to become the lady of the house. But Ben bluntly told the mistress that they should never have been involved. He had used her during a rough patch in his marriage. No matter what happened with his wife, there was no future for them because he had never loved the mistress. In a fit of spite, the mistress lashed out, revealing that the father of the other child in his wife's womb was none other than the police officer. At the same time, Constance had plans on the unborn child in Vivian's womb. She made overtures to her young lover, hoping he would join her in forming a family and adopting the child. But the young man was unwilling. He had a job and an unfulfilled dream of stardom. Constance crushed his dreams by declaring he wasn't a real man. Speechless from the insult and clinging to his last shred of defiance, he grabbed his clothes and left home. The young lover sought fishy comfort with the mistress, but after their smelly encounter, he suddenly realized he enjoyed being provided for and convinced himself he must love Constance. This infuriated the mistress, who in a fit of rage stabbed the young lover to death. Now their spirits could meet every day. Looking at his own dead body, the young lover lamented that Constance was right. He would now never achieve fame. After consulting with the other ghosts, the mistress decided to find someone to dispose of the body. The next day, a group of basketball players found the young lover's corpse in the bushes, his death mirroring that of the actress. Vivian was now living a miserable life. Her husband was unfaithful, her daughter selfish, and the family was united only in appearance. She became inexplicably pregnant and was schemed into a psychiatric hospital by the mistress. What's more, 2 female ghosts and a living person were all waiting for the child in her womb. Then Constance visited the hospital under the guise of neighborly concern, covertly indicating she wanted to raise her unborn child. Exhausted, Vivian sent Constance away. At home, Ben summoned the police officer, wanting him to confess everything. The officer bluntly told him he was infertile, having tried unsuccessfully for 5 years with his ex-wife. Before leaving, he mocked Ben for committing his wife to a mental institution. That night, Ben, holding a rubber suit, demanded the truth from the housekeeper. He felt that admitting his wife to a psychiatric hospital was a grave mistake. The housekeeper congratulated him and finally revealed her old true face in front of him, leaving Ben speechless in shock. Constance sought out the medium to ask about the consequences of a union between a human and a spirit. The medium told her the story of the box in the church. When the bells of St. Peter's Cathedral ring and a new pope is chosen, he will be taken to the House of Tears. There they will receive the keys to the box, which contains a paper prophesying that the offspring of a human and spirit will bring about the end of the world. The scene shifts back to the year 1994, when Constance and the scarred man formed a new family, and she finally fulfilled her wish to return to her own haunted house. On Thanksgiving Day, the whole family gathered to share a meal and pray. It was clear that Tate harbored deep resentment towards his new father. After all, it was the scarred man who smothered his brother to death, the deformed child previously found in the attic. But the mother insisted that his brother died naturally. Besides, she couldn't fathom why Tate couldn't be just a bit more obedient. But Tate, ever the rebel, would never become the so-called obedient child she often mentioned. The dinner ended on a sour note. The next day at 7 a.m., Tate, under the influence of drugs, methodically loaded a gun and grabbed a can of gasoline. He went straight to his new father, the one who had killed his deformed brother, doused him in gasoline, and lit a match. In an instant, the man was engulfed in flames, which explains how the man got a burned face. Later, Ben sincerely came to the hospital to apologize to his wife, but she was too exhausted to accept it. All she wanted was for him to leave her alone. Despite the doctor's disapproval, Ben revealed that she was carrying twins with different fathers. Riddled with guilt, he wanted her to come home, but she insisted she would never return. Meanwhile, 2 police officers approached Constance. They were investigating the death of her young lover and came to question her. Things weren't peaceful for Ben either. He was busy calling the DNA testing facility while also dealing with the truancy officer urging his daughter to return to school. It had been 16 days since Violet last attended school, and with the mother unreachable, there was no choice but to pay a visit in person. If Violet continued to miss school, the school would take legal action against Ben. Violet was lost in her own world when her father knocked on the door trying to have a heart-to-heart. After some persuasion, Violet promised she would go to school the next day. However, Tate intervened and prevented her from going. Violet passively accepted the situation. Constance went to confront the scarred man. She feigned gentleness at first, lulling the man into a false sense of security. But in the next moment, she pressed a knife against his throat. She believed that it was him who had killed her young lover out of jealousy. The scarred man quickly denied it, claiming that he only helped move the body. According to him, it was Tate who had committed the act. Constance was shocked by the revelation, and before she left, she didn't miss the opportunity to mock him, revealing she never loved him and had only seduced him for the sake of her family. When Constance got home, she was met by 2 police officers. She cursed under her breath as a knife fell out of her bag. She was then taken to the police station. To the officers, it was apparent that the lady had a suspicious background. Many people around her had died under strange circumstances. One child of hers died a natural death, another was lost in a car accident, and the only one left had turned into a mass murderer, executed on the spot by the police. This struck a nerve with Constance. The police also questioned her about her mysteriously missing husband and the housekeeper. Of course, Constance denied any wrongdoing, not admitting to burying the housekeeper's body in the backyard or feeding her husband's remains to the dogs. The police didn't believe her story. They had always suspected that the 2 persons' disappearance wasn't as simple as it seemed, but were just short of the evidence needed to charge Constance with murder. The interrogation was interrupted by the arrival of a lawyer who was there to help her out of this predicament. On the other side, Ben had a pest control expert come to eliminate pests in his home, unaware of the deadly intent lurking within. Tate, in the basement, was preparing to kill again. Oblivious, Ben was on the phone discussing scholarship opportunities with a boarding school. Overhearing this, Tate quickly informed Violet that her father planned to send her away, which would separate them. Tate assured her that this wouldn't keep them apart, then donned a rubber suit. That day, the scarred man went to the haunted house and from the basement pulled out the clothes of Constance's young lover. The young lover appeared confused, asking why the man was taking his possessions. Despite being dead, the young lover was curious if he had made the news. When he heard that his story had made headlines, he was pleased. He seemed to have a healthy detachment from his current situation, happily playing with 2 little girls. The scarred man was momentarily lost in thought upon seeing this scene because the 2 girls were his daughters, and his wife stood beside him. Their faces bore the horrific marks of being burned by fire. The scarred man admitted his mistakes to his wife and resolved to make Constance pay for her actions in prison. After Ben had just finished showering and stepped out of the bathroom, he was ambushed from behind by Tate, who was clad in a rubber suit. The two quickly scuffled, and Tate managed to knock him unconscious. Just before passing out, Ben realized that the man in the rubber suit was always Tate. The lawyer told Constance that it's difficult to win the case because the police had already gathered some evidence against her for murder. To her surprise, upon arrival at the police station, she learned that the scarred man had turned himself in. Meanwhile, Tate was persuading Violet to take poison so that no one could separate them, and they could be together forever. Violet questioned if Tate had harmed her father, and Tate suddenly lost control, yelling that he hadn't hurt her father and that they were running out of time. Violet, sensing something was amiss, asked if she could go to the bathroom to take the poison and then rushed out to call for help from her father. Oddly enough, Violet found that no matter where she went, she was unable to leave the house, which frightened her. She pleaded with Tate, saying she didn't want to die, but Tate told her it was too late and wanted to show her something so she would understand. Tate showed Violet her own dead body, causing her to break down completely. She had died after taking sleeping pills. Tate expressed his regret, not wishing to reveal the truth in such a manner. They then had an honest conversation, free from all constraints, and played cards together. Violet asked about their future, and Tate replied that it would be as their vows promised, enduring through the ages. The scene shifts to the scarred man, who is now in prison making a phone call. He questions why Constance didn't ask him why he turned himself in. She dismissively replies that she learned long ago not to question why strange people do strange things. As he was leaving, the scarred man wished he could hear her say she had feelings for him, but Constance just left without any words. The scene shifts to the time when Constance was the house owner. A young Tate was playing with toy cars on the floor. As he played, a car slid into the basement. Tate followed it down and was startled by the sudden appearance of a monstrous face. At that moment, Charles's wife Nora appeared and drove the monster away. She told Tate she would protect him, and his heart was touched by her kindness, something he had never experienced before. For a moment, he truly wished Nora was his mother. Time flew by and Tate grew up. One day, he went to the basement and saw Nora crying, but she had forgotten who he was. Tate repeated to her the words she had once told him, "Life is short, don't be sad." However, Nora was overwhelmed with sorrow. Her soul was doomed to be trapped forever, and she constantly yearned for her children. Tate had previously promised that the child he would have with Vivian would be given to Nora. However, plans had changed. He had fallen in love with Violet and did not want to harm his deformed brother, yet Nora was insistent on having the child. On this day, Ben dragged Violet into the car to go to the psychiatric hospital to pick up her mother. Violet was unwilling. After all, she couldn't escape the house. Sure enough, after being forcibly pulled into the car, she found herself back in the mansion, only able to stand by the window and watch her father's car drive away. Violet didn't know how to hide the fact that she had died from her parents, so she consulted with Tate. Tate felt that no matter how much she tried to hide it, the truth would come out eventually. Violet mentioned that all the ghosts in the house were unhappy, but Tate believed they were different because they had each other. However, Violet regretted that they couldn't have children. The scene switches to the gay couple who are decorating the nursery. Violet enters and curiously asks where they found a surrogate mother. The submissive partner replies that it's her mother, of course. It seems that all the ghosts in the house covet the twins in Vivian's womb, including this gay couple. Violet thinks they are delusional because her parents are about to move out soon, but the couple believes Violet is the one with the wild fantasies, as why would parents leave their child behind and go away? That day, Violet called over Constance and told her that the gay couple planned to kidnap the twins from her mother's womb. Constance assured Violet that this would never happen, but Violet wanted Constance to find the medium for her, as she believed the medium must have a way to help her get rid of the ghosts. Constance went upstairs to confront the submissive man, mocking him for the unnaturalness of men being together and how he could dare to let the twins have gay fathers. Thus, the two clashed head-on, as they both wanted the children. Seeing this, Constance relented that she would just take care of one of the twins. But the submissive man was uncompromising, saying that he wanted both. He was already fantasizing about smothering the children with a pillow when they're 1.5 years old, so they would forever stay at their cutest age. On that day, the medium arrived at the house and immediately felt all the oppressive atmosphere it emanated. The house was nearly full to capacity, treating the souls trapped between the worlds of the living and the dead as a pathway. The medium sensed Tate's presence behind her. She was in panic, telling him he couldn't stay here. Tate had no choice but to leave. The scene shifts to the psychiatric hospital, where Vivian was ready to go home with Ben. At this moment, the doctor appears and informs her that the children need to be delivered prematurely because one of the twins in her womb is growing rapidly at the expense of the other, who is becoming frail. Back in the haunted house, the medium speaks of a story from hundreds of years ago in America. There was a colony where 117 people of all ages died overnight for some reason. That place came to be known as a haunted ground, where the resentful spirits wandered, appearing in nearby indigenous tribes and killing indiscriminately. An elder, knowing this couldn't continue, cast a powerful spell to restore peace. Meanwhile, Tate paced back and forth in a room, displeased with the medium because she had just driven him away. However, Violet hoped that Tate would join her in searching for the submissive man's ring to complete a ritual to exorcise the gay couple. Reluctantly, Tate agreed to help. He said that since they are going to be together for a long time, they must find a way to coexist peacefully. Hearing this, the dominant man got angry, exclaiming that there was no peace to be had, especially since he died at Tate's hands. Tate intentionally brought up the Halloween incident, hitting a sore spot for the dominant man, who ended up beating Tate as a result. Ironically, the dominant man had been able to leave the house that night, but because of Tate, he was now trapped. Coincidentally, the submissive man walked in just as his dominant partner was beating Tate, which distracted him. But Tate achieved his goal. He got his hands on the ring. Ben and his wife arrived by car back at the entrance of the haunted house. Vivian didn't go inside. She sat in the car, experiencing intense pain due to the fetal movement inside her. Meanwhile, Ben was trying to pull Violet away, asking her why she suddenly disappeared in the car. Violet, left with no choice, answered resignedly that she was just inside the house. The father didn't believe her, suspecting his daughter had been on drugs. Out of desperation, Violet cried and told her father the truth about her death, urging her parents to leave the place quickly. On the other hand, Vivian was in unbearable pain, struggling out of the car. Constance, seeing this, realized she was about to give birth and quickly helped her into the house. Ben attempted to call for help but found no phone signal. He then noticed that the twin brothers had damaged the car and the tires were flat, ruining their escape plan. As he turned back, he saw that the lights in the house were out. Dr. Charles and the previously harmed medical student were assisting his wife in giving birth. The father felt something was off, but Constance urged him to focus on his wife. During the labor, Vivian, puzzled, asked who they were. Her husband replied they were there to help. Ben watched his screaming wife in pain and couldn't help but tear up, remembering how he had been by her side during Violet's birth. Memories and reality intertwined as Dr. Charles told Ben that one of the children was stillborn, but in truth, Charles had given that child to Nora. Violet used the medium's method, throwing the submissive man's watch into a fire pit and reciting an incantation. However, it had no effect on the submissive man. Opening up, the submissive man declared there would be no nursery. They wouldn't become parents, but at least her mother's children would be safe from them. The story then turns to Tate, described as a monster who would never reform. Violet defended Tate, but the submissive man's next words left her speechless. Her boyfriend Tate had not only killed him and his dominant partner, but had even assaulted her mother. Vivian had a difficult delivery, feeling as if she were being torn apart, but she gave birth successfully. Constance took the child away. Violet and her father stood by her mother's side, crying as they accompanied her through her last moments. Vivian didn't survive the childbirth and closed her eyes forever due to the complications. Violet became exceptionally calm at her mother's passing. She walked upstairs expressionlessly, confronting the dark memory that Tate always dreaded. She knew everything that the boy she had always loved was an unforgivable demon. Violet admitted that Tate was the sole light in her world. She loved him, but couldn't forgive his crimes. She wanted Tate to pay for what he had done and shouted at him to leave. Tate disappeared, and ghostly Vivian appeared, proud of her daughter. After Vivian's funeral, it was Constance who looked after the newborn child. Ben wanted to take the child back to his own home to care for him. As he was about to leave Constance's house, he saw a picture of Tate on the table, triggering memories of when he had called Tate's mother to say he no longer wanted to continue treatment for Tate. This was because Tate's relationship with his daughter had crossed his limits. Ben asked where Tate was now, and Constance replied, "In the grave." Knowing the truth, Ben suppressed his emotions and returned home. At home, Vivian was trying to adapt to life as a ghost. Seeing her husband caring for their child, she couldn't help feeling moved. Despite his flaws, he was a good father. Vivian also resisted the urge to appear, knowing that only if she and her daughter remained unseen could he let go and leave sooner. Even though they lived under the same roof, they felt so distant from each other. Overwhelmed by grief, Ben was about to end his life with a handgun when his wife finally appeared. Ben thought that by dying, they could be together forever, but the wife wished for him to leave with the child and never return. Their daughter also appeared, persuading him along with her mother. Just as Ben was preparing to leave with the child, the ghostly mistress appeared and hanged the husband on the chandelier. In the next moment, the family of 3 was finally reunited. It was a sunny day with a pleasant spring breeze when the house welcomed its new owners, a Spanish couple and their skateboard-riding child. The real estate agent concocted a tragic romantic love story for the new protagonists. The wife died in childbirth, the husband hung himself in grief, and the only surviving family member was a dog, now adopted by the agent. The son, while skating inside the house, took a fall, with the ghostly twin brothers playfully chasing after him. Confused, the boy was reassured by his father, who told him they had decided to buy the house. Thus, the house welcomed its new victims, leaving one to wonder what story the real estate agent would fabricate next. One day, the police officer visited Constance to understand the circumstances of Ben's death. That day, Constance was originally planning to visit Ben and his child, but discovered Ben hanging upon entering. She rushed to the basement to find the mistress, who arrogantly told Constance that she would not give up the child unless she died. At that moment, the ghost of her young lover appeared and slit the mistress's throat, blood flowing freely. Meanwhile, Violet was happily chatting with the skateboard boy in his room when Tate appeared at the door, angrily watching everything. Elsewhere, the Spanish couple was lost in their passion, prompting Ben and Vivian to recall their own similar past. Hearing that the couple wanted a child, Ben and his wife did not want their own tragedy to repeat, so they decided to offer help. The housekeeper appeared at this moment, telling them that although the house was filled with many malicious and vengeful spirits, there were also many kind ones. Together, they agreed to stage a terrifying yet well-intentioned ghostly trick. At night, a familiar scene unfolded once again. The new house owner began to sleepwalk, and the man in the rubber suit appeared. His wife was startled awake and started to struggle frantically. Kind-hearted ghosts began to manifest, revealing their bloody, pre-death selves to the new Spanish couple that had moved in, showing them the true nature of the house. In what seemed like a fit of rage, Vivian sliced open Ben's belly, causing his entrails to spill out. In response, Ben shot Vivian to die as shit. This spectacle left the Spanish couple petrified. But when they looked again, the couple was unharmed and warned them to quickly leave this haunted abode. The skateboarding boy, awakened by the noise, saw the ghostly Tate appear in his room. Tate told the boy that the girl he had seen during the day was his ex-girlfriend. They had broken up, but Tate was there to help his former girlfriend find a new boyfriend, considering it's quite lonely to be a ghost on her own. At that moment, Violet appeared, and as they looked at each other, they realized that none of their past troubles mattered. They embraced and wrestled their ghostly tongues. Violet bid Tate farewell and disappeared into the darkness. The family of 3 stood at the doorway, watching the Spanish family flee in a panic. Vivian mused about who the next unfortunate soul to move in might be, but they knew what they had to do. The real estate agent, with no other choice, placed a for sale sign on the property. Coincidentally, a tour bus arrived, filled with tourists eager to see the infamous house. The guide vividly described the horrors of the ghost house, and Ben's family became a part of his stories. Tate found Ben, hoping to continue his treatment. To Ben, Tate was nothing but a bona fide lunatic. Tate questioned why so many people were drawn here, and Ben recalled Tate's own words. Those so-called patients don't want to take responsibility for their lives, so they pay someone to listen to their nonsense to make everything feel special. Meanwhile, this tearful young serial killer desperately sought forgiveness, though Ben didn't believe Tate was truly remorseful. As he was about to leave, Tate began to confess his sins, saying that he had burned his mother's boyfriend, shot 15 high school students, and killed the gay couple. Tate didn't expect forgiveness, but hoped Ben would talk to him occasionally. Meanwhile, Vivian was in her room, engrossed in playing the cello, when she was distracted by the sound of a baby crying. She hurried to the basement and found Nora caring for her own stillborn child, who was always sickly and fussy. Vivian tried to soothe the baby, but Nora resisted, saying she had reserved this task for herself and that Vivian could not take the child back. Vivian insisted that she had a way to calm the baby, and Nora finally allowed her to try. With a lullaby, the child gradually quieted down. Nora was also in pain, unsure if she could be a patient mother, feeling a suppressed rage whenever she couldn't soothe the crying child. Vivian took the baby to the living room and asked the housekeeper to try holding him. The kind old servant lamented that if it weren't for what had happened in the past, she might have been a good mother herself. Vivian then asked the housekeeper if she would like to be the child's godmother, to which she happily agreed. On Christmas Day, Violet was adorning the Christmas tree. The whole family, along with the housekeeper, gathered together in festive spirits. Even in the darkness, they couldn't forget the happiness they once shared. 3 years later on this day, Constance, in a cheerful mood, went to the salon to get her hair done. She excitedly told the stylist that she had recently adopted a child. Then she concocted a tragic backstory for the child. Following that, she asked the stylist to give her a younger-looking hairstyle. Suddenly, Constance became reflective. Over the years, she had always thought herself destined for greatness, believing she would make it on the big screen. But when dreams collided with reality, they turned into nightmares. The dazzling crown remained out of reach, and the funeral wreaths were inescapable. Her glory faded, loneliness set in, and the pain persisted. Now she understood that the hardships brought by fate could, in another way, herald the arrival of a new boy in her life. This gave her new aspirations and a new light. She wanted to be a good mother, but fate is fickle. When Constance got home, she found a pool of blood on the floor. The little boy had blood on his hands and was smiling at her, chilling her to the bone. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.